Some folks say the prairie wind whispers secrets if you stand still long enough to listen. That morning, as I watched a stranger hand over $2 in exchange for a girl not yet 20, I swear I heard the land itself go quiet, like it knew something was about to shift. Something big. They say a man's worth is in his word, but in Pine Hollow, a man's word could be bought for the price of a drake, and a girl's life for even less. Now, if stories like these make your blood boil and your heart beat just a little louder for justice and redemption, I hope you'll stick around. Hit that like button and subscribe, because this isn't just a tale of dust and desperados. It's the kind of story that unearths dignity from dirt. And this is only the beginning. It started on a Tuesday, the kind of dry, sharp-edged day where even the sun seemed mean. The sky stretched wide and unfeeling above the hills, and the wind blew hot across the dry wood planks of Main Street, kicking up little devils of dust that danced through the air like mischievous spirits. I was leaning against the post outside old Silas Krieg's general store, puffing on a hand-rolled cigarette, when I saw her, Clara Bellamy, step down from the porch of the saloon with a face that didn't match her dress. The dress was white, frilled, and stitched in the kind of careful way you only get when it's made by a mother's hand. But her mother was long gone, and her father, well, he was right behind her, red-faced and reeking of rock-gut whiskey. He had a gleam in his eye like a man who just convinced himself he was doing something clever. Ahead of them stood the buyer, tall and rough around the edges, the kind of man you heard about before you saw. Boaz Cutter. Black hat, broad shoulders, reputation wrapped in rumor. $2. That was the price he offered. Not for her labor, not for her hand in any tender way. It was understood without words. She was being sold, plain as that. And Clara didn't cry. She didn't run. She just stood there, looking at the horizon like maybe she could disappear into it if she stared hard enough. Folks say Cutter was an outlaw once, though nobody could agree on what kind. Some said he'd fought in border wars. Others swore he'd killed 10 men and buried their names beneath fence posts. But what struck me wasn't the legend. It was the way he held his hat in his hands, like it mattered what the girl thought of him. That wasn't the gesture of a brute. It was something else. Something stranger. They didn't call it a wedding. Hell, they didn't call it anything. No preacher. No vows. Just an exchange of coin and a nod. And the girl climbed into Cutter's wagon without a single backward glance at the man who raised her. Or tried to. It'd be easy to say I judged him then, Boaz. That I saw a man buy a young girl and thought him a monster. But the truth is, there was a flicker of something in the way he looked at her. Not lust, not pity, something colder and yet kinder. Like a man who saw not just what she was, but what she'd survive. The wagon wheels creaked over the dirt as they rolled past me, and Clara caught my eye just for a second. She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. And I knew in that moment, this wasn't the end of her story. This was the beginning of something far more dangerous, and maybe, just maybe, something more honorable. That night, the saloon was louder than usual. Everyone had a theory. He'll break her in by morning, muttered old Parson Ellis, drunk enough to forget he wore a collar. She won't last a week before she runs screaming, said another. But no one dared say it loud when Cutter was near. The man had a way of drawing silence like blood draws flies. A few days passed before the whispers started to change. Turns out Clara wasn't living in the main house with Boaz, but in the east room, separate quarters. She still wore her white dress, kept it clean, and walked with her chin up like she hadn't been bought at all. Word spread that she had books now, real ones, and Boaz had cleared out a whole desk for her to write and read. Some folks called it strange. I called it interesting, because Cutter never touched her. Not once. At least not in public. And in a town where possession was often proven with bruises and broken spirits, that fact alone made folks uneasy. It didn't fit the narrative they were used to. The one where power always meant cruelty. Then came Sunday. The church was half full, the preacher halfway sober. The whole town turned when they walked in. Clara wore a blue dress now, simple but proud, and Boaz. He walked 2 steps behind her, not beside. And when her lace came undone halfway down the aisle, that hardened outlaw dropped to one knee in front of the entire congregation, not to propose, but to tie it for her. With care, the room went still, real still. You could hear the wind pushing against the shutters like it was trying to come inside and see what was happening. And Clara? She gasped. Not loud, not dramatic, but loud enough. Because that one act, the bowing down, the silence, the gentleness, it broke every rule she'd been raised to obey. That was the first time the town began to wonder if maybe the girl hadn't been bought at all, but rescued. And if Boaz Cutter, the man they feared, wasn't something much more dangerous than an outlaw. He was something rare, a man who saw value where others saw property. And that, my friend, was going to change everything. It's a funny thing, how fast a town turns quiet when it doesn't know what to make of something. In Pine Hollow, a man kneeling to tie a woman's shoe said more than a sermon ever could. And while the gossips whispered one version of the story, I watched a different tale begin to unfold. Not in loud declarations or fire-lit kisses, but in glances and silences, in the way a girl who'd been sold began to stand a little taller with each passing day. Clara Bellamy, Cutter now, though no one dared say to her face, wasn't the same girl I'd seen step into that wagon 2 weeks earlier. She still wore her hair in a tight braid, still moved like she expected someone to tell her to sit down or shut up. But there was something blooming behind her eyes, something that didn't quite have a name yet. Boaz Cutter, for his part, acted like a man who'd brought home a storm and wasn't quite sure whether to brace for impact or let the rain wash him clean. He'd given her space, her own room, her own money. I heard he even let her keep teaching the town's children, despite the sideways glances from church ladies and bitter men who thought education should end at marriage. But every evening, without fail, Clara came home, not like a woman returning to a cage, but like someone returning to shelter. And Boaz? He never waited inside. Always on the porch, hat in hand, like a man hoping to be invited into something softer than solitude. I saw them once, near the creek, not far from the north pasture, planting seeds together. Tomatoes, I think, though I couldn't say for sure. She knelt in the dirt, laughing at something he'd said, and I swear it was the first time I'd heard that sound in months. Not just from her, from anyone. It was around then that Marcus Blackwood started sniffing around again. Now, Marcus wasn't the type to concern himself with schoolmarms and garden rows. He was a land baron in a suit that cost more than a ranch hand made in a season, and his smile was slicker than the snake oil peddlers who passed through town. He'd always eyed Cutter's land like it owed him something. And now that Cutter had someone to lose, well, that made it all the more tempting. It started with questions. Innocent, on the surface. Is it true he paid for her? She's still sleeping in the East Room? Ain't much of a marriage if she's out teaching arithmetic and he's home reading poetry, is it? Pine Hollow's gossip mill chewed those words up and spat them into every parlor, bar, and feed store. Clara heard it. I know she did. But she didn't blink, didn't flinch. She just bought more books and planted more herbs. But Boaz, he felt it, like a man waiting for the storm to break. It was Clara who brought it up first. I heard it from Sarah Mitchell, one of her brightest pupils, who overheard her teacher ask Boaz the question plain as day. Does it bother you that they think I'm not really your wife? Boaz, by Sarah's account, said nothing for a long moment. Then he stood, crossed the room, and said in a voice like gravel and truth, "What they think don't matter, but what it means for you does." And so that Sunday, they sat closer in church, her hand on his arm, his thumb tracing small circles on her knuckles. The town took notice. Mrs. Patterson nudged her husband. The preacher cleared his throat extra loud, as if God himself was watching. It wasn't for show. Not really. It was protection. It was strategy. But the line between pretend and real, well, sometimes it fades without warning. A few days later, Boaz added something new to the porch, a second rocking chair. And every evening after supper, they sat side by side watching the sun dip behind the hills like it had somewhere better to be. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. But the silence between them began to feel like the kind you trust, not the kind that hurts. Then came the night I'll never forget. Clara was walking home from the schoolhouse late, books bundled in her arms, when she was stopped on the road by one of Blackwood's men. Big fellow, greasy hair, smile like a wolf. "You ought to be careful out here, miss," he'd said. No telling what kind of trouble could find a lady all alone. Clara didn't answer. She just kept walking head high. But the next morning, she showed up at the gunsmith's. Bought a pistol, paid in silver, asked for lessons. When the smith blinked at her, she said simply, "My husband can't be everywhere." And that night, Boaz was seen building a target post out behind the barn. The following week, folks heard the shots, sharp and steady. And soon after, Whispers started again, but this time, they were different. She's got a steady hand, that girl. Heard she hit a tin can clean off the fence post from 40 feet. Boaz don't just have a wife. He's got a partner. And he did. Clara began to change, subtly, steadily. Her voice grew firmer in the schoolhouse. Her steps quicker on the porch. She no longer looked like a girl trying to disappear. She looked like a woman learning the shape of her own power. And Boaz? He watched her. Quietly. Proudly. Like a man witnessing spring after a long, bitter winter. He wasn't gentle with many things. But with her, he was careful. Not delicate. Just careful. Like she was something precious. Not fragile, but hard-won. They never called each other sweet names. Never kissed in public. But the way he looked at her when she was reading by the fire, or the way she rested her hand on his arm when they walked through town, that told a story louder than any preacher. The town didn't know what to make of it. Still doesn't. Because in Pine Hollow, folks understand power. They understand ownership. But what Boaz and Clara were building, that was something else entirely. It wasn't a marriage born of love, but something was growing in its place. And that something was about to be tested. Hard. Because Marcus Blackwood wasn't done. Not by a damn sight. The prairie has a way of revealing what people are made of. It doesn't care for words. It doesn't care for plans. It just waits, silent, merciless, and then it strips away everything but truth. And that truth came roaring down the ridge just after sundown. 5 riders. Marcus Blackwood at the front, all arrogance and tailored leather, with 4 hired guns trailing close behind. They didn't bother hiding. They didn't need to. Blackwood thought he owned the outcome already. That a man like Boaz Cutter, honorable and worn from years of living right, would fold under the weight of threat. He didn't count on the woman standing behind him. Clara was in the upstairs window, pistol in hand, her breath steady. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't afraid. What she felt, she would tell me later, was clarity. Cold and certain. Like every hardship in her life had led to this moment, when she would finally stop being a thing handed off, bought, or bartered, and start being someone who chose. Boaz stood in the yard alone, rifle resting on his shoulder, eyes fixed on Blackwood. "You're trespassing," he said, voice flat as river stone. Blackwood dismounted slowly, smirking. "Still pretending this is yours? That she's yours." That was when the first rifle cracked. Not from Clara, but from behind the barn. One of the townsmen. The bullet hit the dirt inches from Blackwood's boot. It wasn't war yet. It was a warning. Blackwood raised a hand to still his men, but the mask was slipping. He'd expected fear. Instead, he found himself surrounded. That's when Clara spoke. From the window, loud and sure. "I've already sent the forged deed to the territorial judge, with the witness statement. You're done, Marcus." The silence that followed was sharp as a knife. Blackwood's face twisted. He wasn't used to being outplayed, especially not by a woman he thought was a pawn. He made a move for his weapon. That was the mistake. In a blur, Boaz raised his rifle, not to shoot, but to draw all attention to himself. But the Real shot came from the window. One crack. One clean shot. The bullet hit the revolver right out of Blackwood's hand before he could fire. Shattered the handle. Sent it clattering to the dirt. Everyone froze. Clara Cutter had just disarmed a murderer. Blackwood's men looked at each other, uncertain now. Their pay wasn't worth a war. Slowly, one by one, they backed off. And then Blackwood, chest heaving, looked up at Clara, and I swear, for the first time in his life, he saw what a man like Boaz had seen from the start. A woman with fire in her blood and steel in her spine. He turned and walked away, broken and beaten, not by force, but by something far more dangerous. A united front. The next morning, Pine Hollow felt different. Like the dust had settled just a little softer. People spoke Clara's name with new respect. Boaz's, too, but less with awe now, and more with something like gratitude. They didn't say much about what happened that night. No one needed to. Later that week, I passed by their ranch. She was in the garden, sleeves rolled up, hands in the dirt. He was beside her, reading aloud from a book of poems. Their fingers brushed once, and neither pulled away. It wasn't dramatic. Wasn't the stuff of dime novels. It was quieter than that. Truer. 2 people who didn't find love in the way they expected, but chose it anyway. Every single day after,